Okay, welcome everyone to the Nunavut Shire Council Planning and Consultation Committee meeting, 11th June 2024. Members of the public are advised the meeting will be live streamed and recorded, and a live stream recording will be made publicly available on YouTube and Council's website. Acknowledgement of country. Nunavut Shire Council respectfully acknowledges the Wurundjeri Woi people as the traditional owners of the country on which Nunavut is located, and we value the significance of the Wurundjeri people's history as essential to the unique character of the Shire. We pay tribute to all First Nations people living in Nunavut, give respect to elders past, present and future, and extend that respect to all First Nations people. We respect the enduring strength of Wurundjeri Woi and acknowledge the ongoing impacts of past trauma and injustices from colonial invasion, massacres and genocide committed against First Nations people. We acknowledge that sovereignty was never ceded. Wurundjeri Woi people hold a deep and ongoing connection to this place. We value the distinctive place of our First Nations people in both Nunavut and Australia's identity. From their cultural heritage and care of the land and waterways, to their ongoing contributions in many fields, including academia, agriculture, art, economics, law, sport and politics. Councillors, we've got two apologies tonight. It's Councillor Karen Egan and Councillor Richard Stockman unable to be here tonight through illness, I believe. Just looking for a motion.
Happy to put that forward.
Thanks, Councillor Eyre.
That the committee, acting under delegation from Council, notes the apologies from Councillor Karen Egan and Councillor Richard Stockman.
Thank you.
Happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Any discussion, councillors? If not, I'll put that to the vote. All for? There's none against. Carried unanimously. Thank you. Next agenda item is the confirmation of minutes of the Planning and Consultation Committee meeting held on Tuesday, 14th of May this year. Looking for a mover. Councillor Eyre.
Happy to do that as well. That the committee, acting under delegation from Council, confirms the minutes of the Planning and Consultation Committee meeting held on Tuesday, the 14th of May 2024 in Attachment 1.
Thank you, Councillor Duffy, the seconder. Any discussion, councillors? We'll put it to the vote. All for? None against. It's carried. Unanimous. Okay, the first item on the agenda is the draft urban canopy strategy, consultation findings and verbal submissions. We have a number of speakers which we'll listen to first. There's looks like about 9 or possibly 10 in total. We'll just ask each of you to come up one by one. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. If you can start by turning your microphone on, I'm sure Mr. Connor will help you if you're not familiar with that. But just hang about for a few seconds after you've finished your address. Councillors may want to ask you a question or two. So the first one coming up is Tim Isaacson. Thank you, Tim. Tim's on his way. We'll come back to Tim. We'll circle back. We've got Vicky Shkuroglu. Shkuroglu. Thanks, Jeff. On behalf of Nil and Bio.
And can you hear me with the mask on, or should I take it off? That's fine. Vicky Shkuroglu speaking, also representing Nilambio, and with acknowledgement for traditional custodians across this land, across time. Thank you for the opportunity to speak on this important issue. I support a strong urban tree canopy strategy founded on sound ecological principles and appropriately funded. The Nillumbik community repeatedly speaks up. Countless surveys conducted by council, community groups and individuals point to people's deep connection with trees and commitment to their protection. They are part of our identity and hallmarks of Nillumbik. It is the trees, not buildings and roads, that that make Nillumbik known as the lungs of Melbourne and treasured by residents and visitors. Top priorities identified in Council's consultation, Our People, Our Place, Our Future, all connect to healthy tree canopy and associated biodiversity. These ask that mental and physical well-being is supported, livability is prioritised, the environment valued, admired and protected, and action taken to mitigate climate change. Countless studies show direct connection between healthy tree canopy with associated biodiversity and all these priorities. Our native fauna is under immense pressure and relies on a connected Indigenous tree canopy with understory. Dramatic reductions in insects and small birds, which are important indicator species, have resulted from clearing such vegetation. Stronger protections must be enforced. Local governments are responsible for managing air pollution through their urban planning processes. Nillumbik has great fortune in our tree canopy, but needs to protect and rebuild what has been lost. The significant value of mature trees must be reflected in policy, planning restrictions and accounting, and enforcement for lack of compliance. Education needs to increase for all residents and workers in Nillumbik to ensure understanding and valuing of trees. Council should lobby state government for changes to policy that allows gardens to be defined as decking and other structures, thus reducing permeable and deep soil. This makes it less likely, if not impossible, for mature canopy trees to survive and grow. Change to such policy is crucial, especially given most land in Nillumbik is privately owned. Emphasis must be placed on Indigenous trees appropriate for each ecological vegetation community. They have direct connection to the soil microbiome and the diversity of fauna which co-evolution has shaped. Reinvigorating Indigenous biodiversity is essential to build resilience. A healthy tree canopy protects from heat, mitigates climate change, enables climate change adaptation, and cleans the air. The benefits are innumerable to all life forms. The urban tree canopy
Vicky,
strategy
your time's up, Vicky.
must appropriately protect this asset.
Thanks very much. Any questions of Vicky? She may or may not be able to answer on behalf of Nillumbik, depending on the question. Councillors? No? Thanks very much for the presentation, Vicky. Stay there because you're also speaking on behalf of Don Vincent, and you're up next. So speaking on behalf of Don Vincent, he's the president of Friends of Nillumbik.
Yes, so I think I'm speaking on behalf of Friends of Nillumbik, to support the detailed written submission. We seek to be constructive in improving the strategy and urge Council to commit adequate funding to its implementation. Broadly, we support the intent and direction of the draft strategy. It is important to protect and enhance the urban tree canopy to maintain Nillumbik's role as a green wedge shire, operate in concert with the biodiversity and neighbourhood character strategies, the Climate Action Plan and the planning scheme. We commend and support the Nillumbik Youth Council's vision for the urban tree canopy. Given the beneficial role of trees and canopy vegetation in the urban environment, they must be regarded by Council as critical infrastructure and need active management. The role of trees becomes more important under climate change and increasing threats to environmental biodiversity in Nillumbik. The strategy itself says we should do all we can to protect and enhance the extent, health and resilience of the canopy. Green infrastructure is widely recognised as one of the most efficient tools to ensure cities remain healthy, robust and livable, and can readily be justified on economic benefits. The strategy refers to the need for diversity when choosing canopy tree species, but isn't clear whether it relates to Indigenous trees or any trees. The remnant Indigenous tree canopy in Nillumbik's townships, streets and backyards provides unique landscape character recognised across Melbourne and must remain a continuing feature of Nillumbik, including from a vital habitat or ecosystem viewpoint. Consequently, trees and biodiversity should rank as a higher priority for funding by Council than they have in the past. The goals in the strategy are appropriate, but the targets and measures need to include measures of canopy health and diversity, including preserving mature habitat trees with a focus on Indigenous trees. The focus areas, along with the objectives and proposed actions, are generally appropriate and fundamental to delivery of the strategy. The strategy advises that the proposed actions are aspirational and currently not funded. This is inadequate and must be clarified. The proposed goal will not be met without a reasonable and increasing commitment to funding, so, as a minimum, Council should commit to developing its tree inventory and use this database to progressively plan and prioritise sites for planting or maintenance, particularly where tree canopy is missing, not healthy or depleted. 2, commit to develop the urban tree maintenance, planting and renewal plan along with an appropriate budget. It is unbelievable that there is no such plan or budget currently in place. 3, ensure appropriate funding from developers for the preservation of trees on development sites or where trees are removed for replacement plantings and their maintenance. 4, fund and deliver its existing obligations under the planning scheme and state legislation to rigorously enforce provisions relating to illegal Indigenous vegetation clearing.
And Vicky, you're out of
The
time.
application of these tools should not be discretionary. Thank you.
Thanks, Vicky. Any questions of the Friends of Nillumbik councillors? Vicky may be able to answer. Councillor Duffy.
Thank you very much, Vicky, for your presentation tonight. There was an emphasis on commitment to funding that I heard from what you said, and you did give an indication of some priorities there. But I'm wondering, when you talk about secure funding from developers, what do you think council should be doing in terms of requesting developers or individuals who illegally cut down trees provide back as a way of funding for that?
So I don't know if I can speak on behalf of Friends of Nillumbik. I'm just on the committee, but I think that enforcement measures need to be taken much more strictly. We see very regularly that removal occurs without any real repercussions, and certainly no request for revegetation on a scale that represents the loss. And I think the other thing to consider is that a tree that is 20, 30, 50, 100 years old will take that long for another one to replace it. And so not only will much, much greater financial penalties be off-putting to people, but also to ensure that this represents an ethos. So, you know, much greater penalties and their enforcement need to occur. And, you know, that money can be well used.
But happy to put it to other councillors first. Thank you. You emphasised as well Indigenous planting and talking about street trees. Currently, there are a number of different trees and species that council uses, and when you were talking about remnant trees, I know that red box is a tree that is often on our hilltops and around, and council uses bottle brush as well. What would you prefer to see council using as a street tree where there are options for both of those two types to be planted?
Well, I think it depends on the area, and they do need to be responsive to the ecological vegetation communities that exist, even if they are depleted. And part of the reason is because insects, which are sort of the keystone species, have very close relationships with particular plants that they have co-evolved with. Same with all kinds of other animals. And so we can't expect that we can introduce a plant from somewhere else and that it will support the biodiversity, the faunal biodiversity and the soil biodiversity, which there isn't that much known about it really. All those complex relationships come at great risk when we start introducing things that don't actually relate to each other in those ways. So it would need to be responsive to where we're looking at. You know, we can't just apply a broad brushstroke and expect that things will be okay. It might be all right for the next 2, 3, 5, 10 years, but it's the long-term view of what happens in the soil and in the complexity of ecosystems that we really need to be focusing on. And it's so important to address that complexity. Yep.
Thank you.
Anything else?
No other questions, councillors?
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Vicky. Next speaker is Elizabeth Doig, if I've... Oh, left into a last. Is Elizabeth here?
She's unwell and she communicated with the people, the governance team, and Hank, I think, will be reading on her behalf.
So what's your name, sir?
I'm Hank Tyler.
Hank Taylor.
and Elizabeth contacted me and sent
Yep,
her
Hank Tyler.
report to,
Oh, radio. Yep. Yeah, radio Hank, if you want to speak on behalf of Elizabeth, who's speaking on behalf of the Nillumbik Climate Action Team. Thank you.
thank you for the opportunity to present at this meeting. I am speaking on behalf of the Nillumbik Climate Action Committee. As I see it, the biggest threat to the urban tree canopy and urban vegetation in general is residential development. 70% of the land within the urban growth boundary is private land, and the potential for vegetation loss through inappropriate residential development is considerable. With the current housing crisis, there is ongoing pressure on councils to infill older residential blocks which previously supported large gardens. Compounding this problem is the tend to build even larger houses on smaller blocks, which means there is no room for a garden, particularly not one that is suitable to support canopy trees. Under current Victorian planning provisions, a state law, the minimum garden area for a neighborhood residential zone varies in size, but ranges between 25 and 35%. A garden is defined as a pergola, unroofed terrace, patios, and deck. Outdoor paving, driveways, footpaths, or building eaves under are considered part of the outdoor space. Thus, there is no size limit to the area of the garden within that these structures can occupy. Canopy trees need deep soils, so a garden should not include pergolas, patios, and decks. Because there are state planning provisions, the only recourse council has is to lobby state government for inclusion of deep soils for the planting and establishment of tree canopies via a schedule to the VPP neighborhood residential zone. I would like to see a biodiversity-sensitive urban design trigger added to the residential code, which again involves lobbying state government. Biodiversity-sensitive urban design is a concept that seeks to build nature into urban fabric by linking urban planning and design into the basic need and survival of native plants and animals. The starting point is the health of the natural world as opposed to filling nature into the remaining fragments left after the building environment has been constructed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hank. Any questions of... I probably won't be able to respond to any questions, Hank. We might leave you there, and you're listed to speak later on, but do you want to speak on behalf of yourself while you're there, or do you want to come back later?
No, I'm comfortable here.
Okay,
I'll be-
yep. When you're ready.
My wife and I live on 28 John Street, which is an outstanding example of urban tree cover. We have 5 native Australian trees and 5 Northern Hemisphere trees planted on the property, which is a small block of about 700 square meters. it should be seen as an example of how urban tree cover can thrive in a residential area. There are several benefits from having a dense tree cover. During the summertime, the trees provide shade and cooling of the house. Another way to look at it, doesn't get overly hot. Secondly, it is a very important ecological habitat for birds and insects. You know, most people are ground level, and that's the view they have. If you're a bird or an insect, being high up in the canopy is your home and provides ecological benefits. It's also important in the canopy to have a little opening so you can have solar panels. And this should be one of the considerations in the council's rules and regulations. We have solar panels that work in compatibility with the urban canopy. My background is landscape planning and state government back in America, and I'm very familiar with state laws and local regulations. The council has an opportunity during the 16 years of this strategy to fine-tune its local regulations to suit Nillumbik for maintaining canopy trees. It is somewhat disturbing living on John Street to wake up some mornings and hear chainsaws buzzing away. And this is not a monthly occurrence, it's almost a weekly occurrence. I urge the council to consider a tree planting program over the 16-year period. You all are aware that climate change is creeping up on us. The Royal Botanical Garden has done a study to determine what types of trees, what species of trees are suitable for projected climate change in Victoria. And I urge the staff and the council to become familiar with the Botanical Garden's recommendations for the types of trees that should be planted. 16 years for the strategy is a long time, and that gives the council opportunity to fine-tune its local rules and regulations to accommodate a successful growth in tree canopy in the Shire. Thank you.
Thank you, Hank. Any questions of Hank, councillors? Councillor Duffy.
Hi, thank you, Hank. Thanks for explaining your garden as well. I'd like to come along and have a look at that, if that's all right with you. One of the things that struck me is you've mentioned that the strategy is a long one. It's a 16-year
16 years.
So in your opinion, do you think that that's a risk or is that a benefit? Like, should this policy be for 16 years or should we look at it being shorter in case we get things wrong? Or are you happy with it being a 16-year look into the future with a long-term view that we're going to get things right?
As a biologist and a woodworker who worked at the state level in the governor's office for 34 years on planning activities, 16 years gives you ample time at the local level to fine-tune the regulations. You can hear complaints and find out which ones are appropriate to possibly modify. But on the other hand, you have the opportunity where you see gaps to promote tree planting and not cutting down trees. And as the infilling of property goes, the planning will have to be fine-tuned for probably for each property. Everyone has an exception or some little kink that they want to work out, and the council during the 16 years needs to be flexible in promoting it. And money is always a problem. You should encourage people to use their own resources to plant a tree and to take care of it. It's their child on their property. Yeah.
Thank you, Hank. Councillor Eyre.
Thank you for that, Hank. I'm also curious to know, with the 16-year program, how do you see that working with council and community?
You're in the driver's seat.
Yep.
If you see, you can steer a popular progressive path to make changes and to promote canopies. And don't forget that, you're in the driver's seat. You can work with people. If you see complaints, find out what the source of the complaint is, whether it's valid or not. On the other time, there's opportunity to promote tree planting to cultivate it. And remember, within the Shire, 50% of the land is roughly owned by government and can be managed by government, and 50% is roughly private. So I see great opportunities. Shouldn't be look at 16 years as a straitjacket.
Thanks very much, Hank. No other questions, councillors?
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. Next is Sue Dodd on behalf of Eltham Community Action Group. Thanks, Sue.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak to something that is close to my heart. As a Green Wedge Shire, we should expect to have better than the average coverage in comparison to other LGAs. We should not use the existing canopy cover to be the reason for not significantly improving what we now have as custodians. There should be in this document a specific numerical planting schedule with appropriate budget to increase the tree canopy. The use of the term urban canopy will cause confusion and adverse discussions and outcomes at VCAT. Page 1 defines urban canopy as being any woody vegetation that is over 2 metres in height. This definition is laughable and will give great comfort to developers. There should also be a definition and reference of a canopy tree in this document. Government documents use a canopy tree as a mature tree that is greater than 3 metres in height and normally found in the upper layers of a vegetation type. Various dictionary definitions state that people and vehicles can pass under the canopy. 2 metres is not true canopy, and this document appears to be trying to redefine a common understanding or concept when using that phrase. Banyule Council has specific KPIs for tree canopy. For example, cover across open space, shared paths and surrounding playgrounds to be 50% by 2050. We don't see those sorts of specifics in this document. Have any of you walked on the open area of Alistair Knox Park in Eltham recently? Not down by the river, the creek, really. This will be the closest park for refuge for residents from the dense accommodation developing in the EMAC centre when the power goes off. It is in urgent need of true tree canopy, not just shade cloth over the play area. Currently, it appears that no data is kept on tree removal in public spaces by semi-government bodies and by council, ECAG is often asked. Nor is there data kept on the number of trees removed by permit applications. In the Leinster Farm, between the Eltham Lower Park and the Yarra River, the council developed dump of tree chips and mulch is continuing to grow in height. Those trees were growing in Nillumbik. The number and location of replacement trees appears not to be public. Unless you know what and where trees are currently lost, you cannot budget and plan for replacement. Only after replacement can you then start improving.
Thanks, Sue. Any questions of Sue? Councillor Mayor Ramcharan.
Yeah, thanks, Sue. Well said. Just in terms of the definition of a canopy tree that you touched on. So if I understand rightly, you're saying that we should, I guess, increase that definition to not capture the smaller trees and capture the bigger ones instead, because that will put more onus on developers to produce bigger trees. I just wonder if the flip side of that is that if we are defining them as smaller than the original definition, perhaps that means there are more trees that would be protected. Just wanted to get your view on that side of the
there's
argument.
a couple of things. Because of the time limit, I didn't go on to say that the woody vegetation, woody where is it? A woody vegetation that is over 2 metres. It also goes on to say that could be indigenous, Australian, or exotic. Now that is opening, you know, a plethora of palm trees going down Main Street. I mean, really.
I don't think anybody wants that.
No, but I'm choosing an extreme example. When you're at VCAT, they will often ask you, what is the definition of a canopy tree? I got a phone call from Carlotta saying, what's Nillumbit's definition of a canopy tree? I ended up looking and I couldn't find one. And I eventually phoned the arborist to say what was his definition. And he was saying 5 metres. But you need it on paper to be able to argue with very clever legal people. And it has to be very clear and very definite and not mention that exotic vegetation. I'm happy with the concept of urban vegetation, but not use the word urban vegetation in relation to urban canopy. Urban canopy should be something you can walk under. Urban vegetation, because it's important for biodiversity, even in urban areas, is wanted, but it is not a canopy tree, as this is the draft urban tree canopy strategy.
Thanks for elaborating on that.
Any other questions, councillors? Councillor Duffy.
Thank you, Sue, and thank you for all the trees that you've planted in the Shire in your years of living here. I have a question. I'm glad that you were able to ask a question about definition, because that was important to me as well. But I'll go on to the other point that I've got here, is you mentioned KPIs and other councils having KPIs in their documents. What KPIs would you like to see in this, seeing as there's an insufficient
That clarity there.
clarity for you?
Yeah. Look, I hate to say manual, because it's invidious to pick up one, but they have KPIs for footpaths and minor streets. They have KPIs for parks. They have a KPI is something a beekeeper can think, oh, that's important. We need to do that, and we need to allow for funding in order to do it. And in many of the places that we need trees, they don't need to be $4,000 trees. I think Edendale will sell you a tree in a tube for under $5. So that sort of planting will, long-term view, will bring greater value than a $4,000 tree.
Thank you, and I've got one more question. So you mentioned the absence of a numerical planting schedule and budget.
Yes.
So we do have a budget for tree planting for
In 2 years,
annual.
sorry, in 2 years' time.
Yes.
We've missed the planting season for this year. We've missed the planting season for next year, probably, depending on when the cash flow comes through. So we're now talking about 2026.
So I was wondering, what planting schedule you think would be appropriate and what sort of budget you would like to see?
A reality would strike, and because there are all the priorities that council has to deal with, and you don't know when the bushfire's coming. You just drop everything and deal with that. So it has to be, if you've got a KPI, you have to work out how much that's going to cost. And can we do that rather than an upgrade on a pavilion? And that's a decision that councillors have to take. But I can't put a sum. But I do think $4,000 trees.
Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sue. Carlotta Quinlan, you're next.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that Nillumbik is getting an urban tree canopy strategy, but I am concerned as to how effective it will be. The goals need to be more aspirational. No net overall loss should be an increase in overall canopy. Excuse me. 39% cover in 2040 is not enough when you think that in 2021 Eltham had 40% and Eltham North had 44%. So can we go backwards and still achieve the target? Regarding Heat Island, the canopy cover in all suburbs to be 25% by 2040, but Eltham has 40% now, and only Plenty and Greensborough had less than 25% in 2021. So can most go backwards and still achieve target? As Sue said, no allocated funding when first you agreed to this in October 2022, and I know things take time, but there won't be any funding available for at least another 12 months, so that'll be 3 years, the end of 2025, by the time there is any money to develop this strategy. Sue spoke about canopy trees. I mean, 2 metres. I've looked at many landscape plans at VCAT, and sometimes they say large shrubs and trees, but if they have a 2 metre high tree, that's definitely not what we'd call a canopy tree. And if VCAT developers, lawyers can look at anything in Nillumbik planning scheme and see that we mention 2 metres as being a canopy tree, then we're gone. We won't have anything higher than the gutter of a 1-storey building for 2 metres. I mean, it's not that much taller than me, 2 metres. So, you know, it's not a canopy tree in any sense of the word. I don't know where it's come from. It's sort of read as if it was used because there was an easy way, or there was one way that this could be used in the planning, the program that was being used. I wasn't quite sure about that, but it just doesn't look good, and it's in no way a canopy tree in any sense of the of people thinking about it. The actions need to be more measurable with defined targets, more resources, adequate and enforceable penalties, compliance officers that can go around and see whether endorsed landscape plans have been followed. And the endorsed landscape plans should be realistic and practical. The developer at VCAT will say, yes, we've got 30 trees in this little block, and you think, my goodness. I mean, I've argued, like, that's a little courtyard. Yes, you might put a red box there. It might grow there. But, Mr. So-and-so, nobody in their right mind is going to keep a tree of that size in that yard. It's just not practical. So, yes, that needs to be.
Thanks, Carlotta. I was just waiting for you to draw a breath. But that
I was just starting, Peter.
Thanks very much. Any questions of Carlotta? Councillor Payne.
Thanks, Carlotta. What's the worst case scenario with the 2 metre plus strategy for canopy trees in terms of VCAT and developers? You gave us an example there of a courtyard. So if we stick with this measurement, what's the worst case scenario to your mind in a VCAT application?
Well, I mean, council tries to get as many large canopy trees as they can, like Andrew Feeney and Richard Gloich at VCAT a week ago. We got new plans today on the 1113 Main Road, Eltham Childcare, mainly because Andrew was so convinced and passionate about us having to have more canopy trees. This is what Eltham people want, he's talking about. This is what Nillumbik people want. They don't want this, they don't want that, we want... And so Yeah, I guess there just won't be any, well, they won't take us seriously, let's say, if they can say, oh, but you're doing your urban tree canopy strategy, urban tree, yes, based on 2 metre high trees. So what are you doing here saying we want, you know, in Eltham we need a 5 metre tree, we need a 10 metre tree? You know, they're just going to laugh at us. So it, as I say, I don't know why you chose it or it was chosen, but it's not going to look good. It might give you a canopy. Yeah, I'm not sure how it's going to work, but yeah, I think we're not going to get anywhere with it.
So if it's 2 metres plus, the idea is that that's too low, that developers will then take trees down to that level? I'm trying to work out, in terms of development and plans, what the downside is or the worst case scenario to your mind.
Well, I'm not quite following you in that I obviously haven't explained what I thought I was explaining. A landscape plan will have, they might say there's going to be 30, 40 trees. 62A Braham Street said over 300 trees, I think. It didn't work out that way because part of that was on the urban flood zone, so they had to take a few out. But you know, you can look at it, most of those are quite high, but on smaller developments, like one where there might be Beard Street, you know, 5 units on a smallish block, then I think that was the one where there was this red box, no, that was another one, in a little courtyard. So they'll say, now I've got myself confused trying to follow your train of thought. They will obviously be able to say, okay, we can have smaller trees. If you think a 2 metre high tree is enough,
Yeah.
then we can put that in there and we've satisfied what you think.
Right, so this measurement is just too low for you because developers will put in smaller trees?
They will be able to justify putting in smaller trees. So the architect who went back and rejigged 1113 Main Road over the last week to get in the bigger canopy trees that Andrew Feeney and Richard and we wanted, isn't going to do that because they'll say, okay, you've said 2 metre, in that little 3 metre gap, it's quite okay to have a 2 metre plus tree because it won't go over the children's playground or it won't go over next door's fence. So there won't be any impetus to get taller trees.
But they will grow.
Which will grow.
The 2 metre trees, they'll get taller.
If they're 2 metre tree plus,
Yeah.
they could get taller.
Yeah.
But there's nothing to say, is there? I mean, are you saying at 5 years, years it's going to be 2 metres? I think we're going
Carlotta,
around in circles.
is it fair to say you're thinking that there'll be more intensive built form if we don't require larger canopy trees that you can walk under? Like if you're happy with a shrub, a wattle that can grow up in, 3 or 4 years, then die 15 years later, are you thinking that without these protections you'll end up with a more intense built form on that particular parcel of land if we don't specify canopy trees that we previously all understood were larger than 2 metres?
It's possible, but it's also possible that you will get a different outcome. You will get maybe the same amount of houses, but you'll get little, trees that are 2 metres high, 3 metres high, no taller than the roof, which isn't what the overall. Obviously, it's unrealistic to have huge trees on small blocks, but you're not going to get that at all if you allow, or if that's your. I'm not saying that that's all they will do, but if that's what they can justify doing because you've said 2 metres plus, then that's likely what they'll do. Sorry if I'm not making sense.
Councillor Eyre.
Thank you. Just to clarify what I've heard you say, because I'm not sure everyone else is hearing the same thing that I am, is that you're saying that to have it specified and clear what we call a canopy tree and the heights of a canopy tree, is our preference to put that in, because if we end up at VCAT or we've got someone who's planning a design of their property, they will actually go, okay, a canopy tree needs to be over 2 metres or over 3 metres or the height in these locations or positions. And our preference for Nillumbik is to have the taller canopy tree in certain locations. Obviously, we can have smaller ones because we don't just want really tall trees. So is that what I'm hearing you say?
Yes,
Thank you.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think.
I think we've arrived. Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. That was my understanding of what you were saying. It was about if it's a
good.
2 metre, 2 metres is good enough, and so it would be the good enough.
Yes.
Not a requirement to go 5 or 10, whatever.
Yes.
So, Carlotta, you mentioned concerns about the plan not being aspirational enough and having a target of no net overall loss, and you gave specifics of Eltham having a tree canopy cover in 2021 of 40% and Eltham North of 44%. So would you like to see in the plan we have targets for different locations rather than just the overall, which I think you said was 25%? So that we don't go backwards in particular areas that actually have more. So the highlight we've talked about Greensborough and other places that have less tree canopy and having an average of no net overall loss, but then you rightly pointed out in the places where there is a higher percentage at the moment, there's nothing to stop that from decreasing down to the average.
Yes, definitely.
So you'd like to see in the strategy that we do have targets for the different areas that we already know of?
It would make more sense, wouldn't it? So that some are, yes, some areas are increasing, and where, say, Eltham North is still increasing, but they're not.
Backwards.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no other questions, councillors, thank you very much, Carlotta, for your time in responding to those difficult questions. Alistair Inglis, you're next. Alistair, thank you.
I'm an interested resident not representing any group. In the limited time available, I want to address the magnitude of the minimum canopy target and one or two related issues. The minimum urban canopy target will be one of the main drivers of efforts to enlarge the canopy cover of localities, as well as indicating where effort is needed. The target will also point to the types of responses needed in individual localities. A minimum target proposed of 25%, a minimum target is proposed of 25% by 2040. Currently, only 2 localities have canopy cover that falls below this target, Plenty at 20%, and Greensborough at 22%. Both of these localities are relatively small, so 25% as a minimum canopy target is not very ambitious. According to the draft strategy, all but 4 localities already have over 40% canopy cover. If Nillumbik were to adopt a minimum target of 30%, only 1 locality would be added to those needing increased cover. That's Diamond Creek. Some other municipalities, coming off much lower bases, are setting targets higher than 25%. For example, Hobson's Bay, which in 2018 had only 6% canopy cover, has set a target of 30% by 2040. And Moreland, which currently has 14% canopy cover, has set a target of 29% by 2050. So why wouldn't Nillumbik set its target as 30%, which is now recognised as a minimum for which municipalities should aim? Is it because the challenge of achieving that is considered to be too great? This draft strategy points out that the localities above the canopy cover of private land is 4 to 5% less than the canopy cover across the locality as a whole, and that therefore landowners should be encouraged to plant more trees. That's reasonable, but increasing the number of street trees and trees in parks will make a very significant contribution to canopy cover, and such planting is the activity over which Council has greatest control and which can achieve improvement most quickly. Over the past month, I've either driven or walked most of the trees in the 3 localities that would fall under a target of 30%. I began doing this to see the distribution of street trees and also what proportion of roads have overhead power lines. Power lines limit the extent to which street trees can contribute to increasing...
Alistair, I'm sorry, your time is up. Sorry. Any questions, councillors, of Alistair? Councillor Duffy?
Alistair, I'm actually interested in if you are able to tell me what you were going to say about...
Councillor Duffy, Alistair's time was up. If you have a question, Alistair can answer the question, but we're not going to extend his speech beyond the, I've already extended it beyond the 3 minutes that was allowed. If you have a question of Alistair, he can answer the question, but we're not going to ask him to continue on with his speech.
Would you like to see council prioritise planting trees in the streets that don't have overhead power lines?
Yes, but what I'd like to see most is that the council look across those 3 localities in particular and identify where, according to the rules for planting street trees, which the council already has, street trees could be added to those streets, the ones without power lines. The situation in streets with power lines is going to be different because there are limits on what sort of trees can be planted there. I think trees should also be added to those streets, but in fact, even in those 3 localities, most of the streets have underground power. So the restrictions may not be as great as many people think.
Thank you. And those localities are Greensborough, Plenty and Diamond Creek that you're prioritising?
Well, they would fall under 30%.
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? No? Thanks very much, Alistair. Our next speaker is Ryan Reynolds, if you're here, Ryan. Thank you, Ryan.
The importance of trees and native vegetation cannot be appreciated enough. On the surface, they transfer CO2 into oxygen, but they do so much more than this. Every tree plays a pivotal role in the ecosystem, whether they are dead or not. The importance of trees can never be overstated. While I acknowledge that Nillumbik has the 2nd highest urban tree canopy in all of Melbourne at 39%, with this in mind, it should not be compared to councils like Melton City, as these are grassland areas and not like our rich, biodiverse Green Wedge Shire. Additionally, a heightened focus on protecting old growth trees, particularly hollow-bearing trees. In my opinion, hollow-bearing trees should be better incorporated into existing environments to give more native species homes. In Australia, many native species need native tree hollows, including 17% of bird species, 42% of mammals, and 28% of reptiles. Small hollows with narrow entrances suitable for small mammals, animals such as the brush-tailed phascogale and the eastern pygmy possum, take about 100 years to form. Hollows of a medium size and suitable for animals such as parrots take around 200 years to form, and the larger and deeper hollows occupied by the glossy black cockatoos and other larger animals such as masked owls can take even longer to develop. The importance of old growth trees and hollow bearing trees cannot be highlighted enough. A database needs to be implemented to protect all significant trees within the Shire. The effect of a quality urban tree canopy strategy has on the environment includes mitigation of the urban heat effect, erosion reduction, and moisture retention in the soil, in addition to many more. The aspiration of 90% green wedge and the goal of an abundance of wildlife would solidify Nillumbik's reputation as a desired suburb council for years to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Any questions, councillors of Ryan? No. Thanks very much for your presentation, Ryan. Next speaker is Michael Smith.
My name is Michael Smith. I'm heavily involved in conservation and ecological projects in the Shire. I also teach ecological management. I believe there's not enough emphasis on the importance of canopy corridors for biodiversity and talk of prioritising certain zones to increase canopy coverage in the urban tree canopy draft. I think both these points could be embedded into Goal 1, this goal being that Nillumbik's urban canopy is protected and enhanced. In the peer-reviewed article, Yards Increase Forest Connectivity in Urban Landscapes, the authors talk about the importance of prioritising planting and protection of canopy coverage in the following urban zones for biodiversity. Already established canopy-covered areas, because as canopy cover increases in width, the core habitat in the centre also increases. Core habitat is much better for animal richness. Zones with less traffic are also vitally important. Many wildlife species do not like human activity and noise. And lest we not forget areas where fragmented canopy island can be bridged together, because it is proven that animals such as bats and glider populations fare much better in connected urban canopies. Essentially what I'm saying is, if biodiversity is important to the Shire, and let's face it, how many people move here to be close to a shopping centre, then there is some core ecological theory we should follow to improve wildlife habitat with sensible and knowledge-driven canopy cover plantings and protection. I think this is the least we can do for native wildlife, considering we have destroyed lots of animal habitat and wildlife help provide services such as keeping pest insect populations under control, pollination and seed dispersal. So if we help protect their habitats, they help us have a much more enjoyable life. Makes sense to me. Furthermore, there seems to be a lack of emphasis on the importance of Indigenous canopy cover. Indigenous plants are well known to provide better habitat for native fauna as opposed to tree and shrubs from other parts of Australia and the world. Indigenous plants, as a general rule, also cope better with disease and overabundance of insect attack. Therefore, Indigenous plants would greatly help out with the point emphasised in Section 4, Threats to Urban Strategy, subcategory Disease. Thirdly, in Goal 1 it is stated that the Nillumbik Shire's overall target is to keep an average canopy cover across the Shire of 39%. If the Shire also wants to increase canopy cover across the more built-up areas to at least 25% in each suburb, that it would seem this allows for some canopy to be chopped down and not replaced. Not good enough in a Greenwood Shire. This ain't the Docklands. Additionally, if tackling climate change and protecting biodiversity is a high priority in the Shire, shouldn't canopy cover targets at least be increased from the current canopy cover in the Shire of 39%, especially considering when the 39% average is heavily propped up by 70% canopy cover on private land. And we must not forget...
Your time's up, Michael.
Cool.
Thank you. Any questions for Michael, councillors? No? Thanks very much, Michael. Thanks for your submission. The last speaker tonight is Tim Isaacson. Tim. Just the microphone, Tim.
Sorry about that. Okay, are we doing okay now? Is there another button? Okay, thank you. I'm the out-of-town tourist. I come here for the trees and I come here for the rivers. I come here on a fortnightly basis. Nillumbik, the Green Wedge Shire. Thanks to Rupert Hamer, a visionary Liberal Member of Parliament on the state level. That's a pretty big aim for you guys to match. Personally, I'm from the palm tree and sand suburb, and this is a great place to come to. Overall, I actually think the strategy is positive, but some of the detail is disappointing. The definition of tree canopy is pretty flaky, and that's been discussed, so I'm not going to address it further. Goal 1, no overall net loss in urban tree canopy, which is to say hold steady on 39%, is not very ambitious. I'd be recommending, how about 45% net? No doubt that incorporates some loss of canopy due to development, balanced by Goal 2, an increase in tree canopy across all land tenures. So as I say, aim for 45%. This is the Green Wedge Shire. We know Greensborough, Plenty, and to a lesser extent Diamond Creek need some help. And nearly all other urban growth areas other than North Warrandyte, which is, I guess, addressed in Goal 3 target, minimum urban canopy cover of 25% by 2040 in every suburb and township. Okay, that's a start, but how about aim for 30%? The challenges and threats to Nillumbik urban canopy are many, and these are thoroughly outlined in the document, which is fantastic. Climate change, extreme weather, bushfire threat and mitigation, ageing and diverse tree population, urban development, public infrastructure and utilities, community perception, ignorance about trees. It seems a surprise to me that there are any trees left in Nillumbik, but there are, and you need to protect them and put in some more. The tree planting guidelines, while helpful, look to me to be more restrictive than those in place in, say, the city of Port Phillip, where I live. Specifically, the minimum of 20 metres from an intersection with signals or from school crossings or from streets intersecting a main road seems to be more restrictive than that elsewhere. Your 3 areas to address are education, advice and support to local land occupiers, controls and regulatory protection. Take Manningham as an example, which uses a stick approach and makes sure that compliance takes place. And lastly, your budget. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tim. Almost right on time. Any questions of Tim, councillors? Councillor Payne.
Thank you, Tim. If the City of Port Phillip has a couple of $100 million more in their budget than we do, where would you suggest we get the funds to embark on the planting to get up to 45%?
Well, I'm really interested by what you offered in the community section, which I think is section 2. And I thought there were some fantastic opportunities to work more closely with community. Mm-hmm. So, obviously you don't have the budget that City of Port Phillip do, but neither do you have the population, and you've got plenty of open space, and you don't have to maintain anywhere as many plane trees, not to mention all the other forms of vegetation that the City of Port Phillip deals with, like the palm trees. Yeah. So I do think there are opportunities. I'm not familiar with all of them, but I'd be prepared to work with you, Mr. Payne, if you want to work with me on it.
Thank you, Tim. That's one. That's great.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions, councillors? No, just thank you very much, Tim.
Thank you.
And thank you all the speakers. Well, that's the end of the submissions or verbal presentations tonight. So I'd look to deal with the substantive motion. Councillor Amtran.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to move that the committee acting under delegation from Council 1 acknowledges and considers the matters contained in the verbal and written submissions during finalisation of the draft Urban Tree Canopy Strategy 2024 to 2040 in attachment 1. to make the Nillumbik Draft Urban Tree Canopy Strategy 2024 to 2040 consultation findings report and attachment 2 available to the public on Council's Participate Nillumbik webpage. 3, requests a further report to be presented at the August 2024 Council meeting in consideration of adoption of the final version of the Urban Tree Canopy Strategy 2024 to 2040. 4, resolves that the confidential, unredacted copies of written submissions and survey responses to the exhibition of the public engagement for the Draft Urban Tree Canopy Strategy 2024 to 2040 consultation at attachments 5 and 6 remain confidential on the grounds specified in the definition of confidential information in Section 3(1)(f) of the Local Government Act 2020. And 5, thanks all respondents to this community engagement and expresses Council's gratitude for their contribution to this project.
Thank you, Councillor Emtran. Do we have a seconder?
Happy to second.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Back to you, Councillor Emtran.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again to everyone who came along today. It sort of brings back memories of a month ago when we had the biodiversity strategy up for consultation, and it's really been the same theme in the room tonight. Every single speaker has shown up to speak about how much they care for and love the biodiversity and the tree canopy here in Nillumbik. And it really is a true reflection of what's important to our community. I guess just to sum up some of the themes that came up in what people said, there was a lot about enforcing more strictly, having more repercussions for people who do the wrong thing and remove trees illegally, which is something we're working on, and I think we've made some big improvements in the way that we're enforcing illegal vegetation removal, but there is still room for improvement there. People have spoken about how offsets are simply not sufficient. It's not okay to remove old, well-established vegetation and replace it with small trees. We've got issues with residential development. It is going to continue. That's what's going to happen across Melbourne. And of course, the current planning provisions allow permeable space to include decking and driveways, etc., where trees can't grow. And so those planning provisions really need to be reviewed. And we're doing that through our neighbourhood character strategy, and some of the neighbourhood character overlays that are going to be introduced following that strategy will help to combat that issue as well. Trees are a vital habitat for insects, not just the bigger animals, but insects, which are a crucial part of our ecology. We heard a lot from Sue and Carlotta around the definition of a canopy tree, and I think that's a really good point that's been raised around when there's a landscape plan as part of a development that requires canopy trees to be planted. Well, you should be able to walk under them, and we'd rather have native trees than weird and wonderful trees from all over the world that never really evolved to be here in Australia. People spoke about the need for KPIs and targets, and pointed out that some of the targets may not be as ambitious as they ought to be. I totally agree we should be aiming for absolutely no net loss in any one particular area. And of course, it would be lovely to aim for a net increase as well. But I think that comes down to the next really big point, which is budget. It was mentioned, does a tree really need to cost $4,000 when you can buy a sapling for $5 from Edendale? And I think that's a good point. But if you want it to survive, then it is going to be $4,000. And I think when we look at this strategy and we look at our biodiversity strategy and the amount that they're going to cost, because there is going to be a cost behind this, they're not going to be worth the paper they're written on unless they're funded. And I think we heard that loud and clear from a couple of the speakers tonight. And it's something that we really, really do need to bear in mind. The strategy acknowledges quite pertinently, I think, that this is not within current budget. And I think it's really important for us to acknowledge that. If we pretend it is within current budget, then nothing will ever change. We need to acknowledge and accept that currently the budget doesn't have room for this, and room needs to be made, which is not easy in a rate capping environment, but it's important. It's absolutely critical that we protect our urban tree canopy and our biodiversity. So it will be up to the next council to find the budget to fund these strategies. It won't be easy, but I think it's something that they have to do. And we need good councillors on the next council to help to progress these strategies and make sure they're implemented. I think I said it a month ago, and I'll say it again, but if any of you are interested in running for council, please do have a think about it, because...
point of order, Councillor Earnshaw, and it's not an election speech. Just keep to the topic, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think I made my point. So yes, look, I'd like to thank the speakers again. It's some really good input that we've had there tonight from your speeches and also from the submissions that have been made. So we will go away and continue to rework this. We're also working on our biodiversity strategy as well, making changes based on some of the feedback that we've received. And both of the strategies will come back to Council in the coming months for endorsement. And I look forward to seeing them implemented and becoming a reality. Thank you.
Thank you. With the second elect to speak.
Just to thank all the submitters for coming along tonight and sharing their thoughts with us. We hear you loud and clear, and we will do what we can with what we have. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Any other councillor wishing to speak? Councillor Eyre.
Thank you, Chair. Just a bit of a snapshot of what I heard. There's still, I'm sure, things that I won't mention, not purposefully, but I heard that the KPIs and targets are not ambitious enough. The objectives of good, the goals aren't strong enough. The definition of tree canopy is confusing and needs to state higher trees, not just those up to 2 metres, and we want to be able to walk underneath them. That we use Indigenous planting, that it's a higher priority for council to fund going forward, that enforcement measures are stronger. Alistair Knox Park needs more canopy trees, and that we should be working with the community to increase our canopy. We love our green wedge, and we know our community does. And with that comes biodiversity, our wildlife and our community. Without our green wedge, we wouldn't actually have our amazing community, because the green wedge and our everything that we have here in Nillumbik is what brings our community here. So we wouldn't be the same if we lose our canopy. People would be leaving our community, which we don't want. Thanks to all who have provided feedback and to those who submitted tonight. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eyre. Councillor Duffy.
Thank you. I concur with what you have just said, Councillor Eyre. I heard those messages as well. You summed it up very well. I would just like to say thank you to everybody that took the time to come here today to speak your words to us and your impassioned feedback on the strategy and your desire for Nillumbik to do more. That's come across very loud and clear, and particularly your goal of 45%. I heard that one too there, Tim. Michael. One of the things that was pointed out by one of the speakers today, and it was about blackouts. You know, we're going to be expecting far more of these with climate change and the way things are happening. When Sue talked about Alistair Knox Park as being a place of refuge for all of the people that are going to be living in the Eltham Inner Centre, you know, it did make me feel, it made me think, you know, what about everywhere else? So we do need to have trees as shade for times like that. But there's also the occasion, and this is not meant to trigger anybody, but the very reality that we talk and we think about bushfire. We have had terrible experiences in this shire with bushfire. If we go back and think of 2009 and sadly and tragically the loss that occurred at that time. But I heard on the radio last week in a conversation about tree canopy and the effects of climate change. An ABC radio, Raf was the presenter, and he shared the very sad reminder that in that year of 2009, actually more people died in their homes of heat than did in the bushfires. So we have bushfire mitigation top of mind in this shire because of the reality of what could happen and the loss that we've felt. But if we think of the reality of climate change, and here we have in that same year as that terrible experience, more people dying in their homes because of heat exposure, we really need to make sure that we do this tree strategy properly. And I suppose that's where, for me, I'm delighted with the council officers and the community for coming on this journey. When I put forward the notice of motion back in October to have a Nillumbik tree canopy strategy, it was so that it wasn't lost. And we are working towards that, and we're working towards targets and goals, and hopefully we will have KPIs that are meaningful. And I do hear the comments about some of our neighbouring councils that have KPIs. And, you know, it makes it very real when you can say that we want to have 40% of our footpaths in shade so that people can walk to places and not be in the severe heat of the sun. There are some areas like that we can work on with our plan, but I'm very delighted that we actually have a plan and that our community has bought into that, and we've had 188 people provide some feedback. So thank you to those of you who've come along to share your views tonight. I'm hoping we can look at what we're able to achieve with this plan, but more importantly, look at how we can fund it, because council is a juggle of priorities with where the money is spent. And this is very important money, particularly when we did hear from Ryan about the number of years that are required for trees to grow to be able to provide the habitat for the animals that we have. So thank you.
Thank you. I think I'm the last to speak. Yeah, certainly the canopy tree definition is loud and clear tonight. That needs some clarification. It made me think more broadly about our strategy here in terms of the 2 metre in height. And in terms of canopy tree, we naturally sort of think of, I naturally think of natives, of gum trees, of trees that provide shade and habitat. And trees that generally are very old in the air, and we naturally want to protect them. But if we expand that definition out to the 2 metre high, minimum 2 metre high shrub or anything, you know, we don't want to look like the eastern suburbs. We don't want our cypress box hedges that grow to be 100 years old and, you know, 20 foot tall. We'd much rather see a native eucalypt, you know, grow that height as it always has in the area. So I think it's very much around trying to retain our neighbourhood character, our amenity and habitat for our native wildlife. Different areas have different amenity issues, have different history, and as we said, eastern suburbs might have hedges and you know, cypress hedges, Port Phillip, palm trees. Here I think it's gum trees, and we have to support that, and they're the ones that we should be planting and encouraging and preserving, I think, and enhancing into the future. But no, it was really appreciate the speakers that have come along tonight. You all made very valid points. It certainly is the best way to get councillors thinking, as you do. Many of you have been here numerous times in the past. It is the most effective way to communicate to the council group. We are here, we have no choice but to listen, and we do listen, and hopefully act on some of what you've said. So appreciate everyone for coming here tonight, and all those other written submissions and survey responses that have been filled in. So with that, I'll put the motion to the vote. All those in favour? And against? There are none against, so it's unanimous. Thank you, councillors. I'll step out of the chair and make way for Councillor Duffy for the community consultation part of the meeting.
Thank you, Councillor Perkins. Thank you, everybody. As you know, the planning and consultation meeting has two parts to it. We look at planning matters and we look at general consultation matters. Councillor Perkins is the chair of the planning component and I'm the chair of the consultation item. So we have one consultation item that's up today, and that is the draft leasing and licensing policy. So I would like to see if a call for a mover for this recommendation.
Happy to move the motion as per the papers.
Thank you very much, Councillor Payne. Do we have a seconder?
I'm happy to second that.
Thank you, Councillor Egan. Councillor Payne?
Yes,
Sorry,
we have.
Councillor Eyre.
Oh, sorry, Councillor Eyre. My apologies. I seriously didn't mean to make that mistake. Councillor Eyre.
So we've had a couple of submissions for this This initiative, the officers will review them for the draft licensing and licensing policy, taking into account these submissions. Submitters have been invited to attend the meeting of the Planning and Consultation Committee meeting on the 30th of July this year. And basically all I wanted to say was that the draft leasing and licensing policy proposes no changes to Council's existing practice or fee structure for tenants. The intent is updating the policy to ensure its currency and formalise Council's current practices. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Payne. Councillor Egan, sorry, I've done it again. Councillor Eyre, would you like to say anything?
Yes, I will. Thank you. So just to build on, I need to get your name right.
Try.
Councillor Payne.
Well done.
This policy aims to establish a consistent, transparent, equitable and fair process for the administration of leases and licences for properties owned and managed by council. So the importance of this policy will mean that that all community groups or residents needing a home will be treated equally, not the loudest, the biggest or the first to ask. It covers everything from financial hardship, gambling, vacant land leased to residents, residential, maintenance and repairs insurance. So it's really clear with all the sections that it covers so that everyone has a clear understanding of what to expect from council. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other councillors that might like to speak to the matter? No? Okay. Well, I will keep it very short and sweet to say that this is a very important policy so that we do have equality and processes in place so that everyone is treated fairly and that ratepayers know that with the council assets that we have, that they're being looked after and that there are agreements in place to ensure that those that are tenanting them are looking after them properly, and where there are payments that are required, that those payments are happening as they should. So thank you to all of the people who currently lease out council facilities, from our sports clubs to our various sporting groups and community groups. We're working together with this, and the council officers who are involved in this have put a lot of effort into making sure that this policy is workable, and there will be nuances with different groups that require different things. So with that, I might put this to the vote and ask all those in favour. And that's carried unanimously. Thank you. That brings our meeting to the next section where we have no supplementary or urgent business. There are no confidential reports. And with that, I'm able to close the meeting, and the time is 8:24. So thank you very much, everybody, for your attendance, and thank you, councillors, for your involvement tonight.